The Dramatist Guild is the National Association of Playwrights, Composers, Lyricists, and Librettists. For the first time in a generation, our industry is undergoing a tectonic shift. If you're not a member, join today. Learn more at our website.
Welcome back to The Dramatist Presents TALKBACK. I'm your host, Christine Toy-Johnson, actor, playwright, and advocate for inclusion. This season, TALKBACK focuses on how the theater industry succeeds and fails when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Our guests are all theater professionals working across North America. We recorded our conversations over summer 2019. The Dramatist Guild of America hosts these conversations. In line with the mission of the Guild, everyone comes to our table with their own opinion and perspective and is free to express it. Whether you've been on Broadway or you've yet to see your first show, we're glad you're with us. I'm here today talking with the amazing playwright Kristoffer Diaz about diverse and inclusive casting. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So I wanted to talk to you about all kinds of things, including your insight into the current project that you're working on, Hercules, and how diverse and inclusive casting has come into play in that project.
Yeah, Hercules is a really specific thing. And as it relates to sort of this question, it'll be an interesting, I guess, case study. But it's a very particular set. So the original concept for this particular production falls under the auspices of the Public Theater's Public Works program, created by Lynne de Bessonet. And basically, we bring in folks from all over New York City, just regular folks from all over New York City, community members who are in each of the 5 boroughs and who work with community groups, sometimes related around performance, sometimes related around other identifying characteristics. And they work with Public Works throughout the year and then come in for this final massive production where they perform alongside professional actors, Broadway actors, equity actors. In this case, we've got Jelani Aladdin and Krista Rodriguez and Roger Bart, who was the original voice of Hercules in the Disney movie. And now it's coming back playing another role, playing Hades. It's its own full circle casting conversation, which is not under the purview of what we're talking about right now. It is super fun too. So there's a certain amount of diversity baked into the pie already, right? When you're dealing with folks from throughout New York City and throughout the 5 boroughs and dealing with these groups that we're dealing with, we've already got true diversity, and diversity in a bunch of different kinds of ways. We've got racial diversity, ethnic diversity, religious diversity, I'm sure, although I don't think that's a question that's sort of fundamentally asked as part of all of this. We have age diversity. I think as we record this, that our youngest cast member is going to be 5 years old. Our oldest cast member is probably going to be somewhere in their 70s or 80s. Again, it's really baked into kind of what Lear and company have taken on, and it's really in the spirit of Joe Papp, who wanted to see a theater that reflected what New York City looks like. And that to me is, that's one of the best reasons to make theater.
Right, of course. Yes, that sounds fantastic. Was there any conversation ever where it was discussed that there had to be some kind of intentional inclusion, or has it been something just accepted, like you say, baked in?
Yeah, so 2 parts. So we sort of talked about the macro, which is, the 120 community-based cast members who are going to be part of this, or as of this recording, going to be part of this. I guess when folks hear this, it will have already happened and been a great success, I'm sure. I just jinxed myself. That's the worst thing to do. But we did cast 8 roles with equity performers, in addition to being joined by a Broadway Inspirational Voices chorus, which also has its own sort of amount of diversity baked in. So when we sat out to do the principles, Lear was very clear with me from the very first conversation that we had. And she said one of the things that we wanted to do was think about Hercules as an African-American man. It was built into kind of the concept that we were dealing with, which was a young guy who is big and strong and powerful, but feels awkward and clumsy and uncertain of himself, feels like he doesn't belong in the world that he finds himself in. He doesn't know that he is ostensibly adopted, it happens to be that he's the child of the gods and is adopted by earth parents, mortal parents. But dealing with this sense of what does it mean to feel out of place, and sometimes to feel out of place, not just because you feel small and awkward and unsafe, but also to feel out of place because you're maybe too large. Maybe people are afraid of you. Maybe people, think that you're gonna cause some kind of harm. So that was a big part of what Lear wanted to bring into this from the beginning. The other thing that we knew for sure was that the music of Hercules, which is, it's beloved in a very particular way for Disney films. Some of the songs that are known from the original, which are sung by this group of the Muses, are iconic, and they're gospel songs. And, including the song Zero to Hero, which is just this raucous gospel song, which to me is like one of the greatest numbers in musical theater history, even though it's never really been on stage before. And it's got these big, beautiful gospel voices. And in the original film, the animated versions of those muses really celebrate diversity of body and diversity of body type and, physicality. So that was something that we wanted to deal with as well. We knew that we were going to have a certain amount of an African-American cultural presence in this based on what the music demanded. And then the only other thing that I'll sort of throw in that is, for me, we have the character of Meg, who is this, strong, confident. She's not a Disney princess. She's an iconic Disney character, but she's not a princess. She's a working class Spitfire. And to me, from the very beginning, I was like, I know this woman. It might be my aunt. It might be my mother. It might be Rosie Perez. I know the 5 foot tall Latino woman who's going to come in here and put Hades in his place because she knows the way that it really needs to be. And it was never a mandate. We've done it in workshops where we've had Latinx performers, we've had Asian performers, we've seen it and heard it in a bunch of different ways. But again, we sort of knew that there were specific voices, specific folks that we were thinking about advocating for in a bunch of these roles.
Wonderful. What I love about hearing about this project is that you are really moving from people feeling like they're included to people feeling like they belong. And I think that's such a powerful place to be. So by the time this does air, you'll know the answer to this more than...
Yeah.
It seems like
Let's speculate.
You're all taking this great opportunity to tell the story of Hercules in a really powerful way that will embrace a lot of different people. And I just wonder what you hope people will come away from it thinking and feeling.
You hope it's a good show.
Yeah. Right.
I think it's one of the most important things about Public Works, about the program that Lear has put together, which is that she's doing a show with a massive cast of folks from, various communities throughout New York City. It's a community theater show, but without any of, the idea that means it's going to be lesser in any way than a night of professional theater. We have these performers working year-round in various capacities to come in and understand the mission of what this theater company does. And they've been working with us for a long time to pull this particular piece together. And it's, they're going to be singing songs written by Alan Menken, who wrote every important
right.
Cartoon song
right.
of our lifetime,
right.
And David Zippel wrote the lyrics for, and they're going to be performing it with Roger Bart and James Iglehart and Krista Rodriguez, so it's this amazing, amazing thing that's happening. And I think that's the primary thing we want to take away from it. The other, sort of like, if there's a quote unquote moral of the show, we're thinking about what it means to be strong. We're thinking about the fact that even, somebody like Hercules, who is the strongest, at least in our version, carries this immense physical strength that no one else has ever seen, really becomes strongest when he's sacrificing for others and when he's working together with a community. So, if it's this dual thing of we're not necessarily working towards diversity and inclusion in a conscious way up front, but the stories that we're telling, I think, are really particularly geared towards a similar kind of message in practice, if not in words. We're hoping that folks sort of come to, and it's funny, I'm supposed to keep this to 4 minutes. I will keep it to 4 minutes. I'm teaching a class in September about the contemporary Broadway musical. And my thesis that I've just stumbled on in the last week is that over the last maybe 25 years, maybe since Rent, but I'm biased to talking about Rent, but that the idea of the central sort of idea of the musical, which maybe used to be like a couple falls in love and romance is at the core, tends to be more about this sense of community, right? I think about You Are Not Alone. I think about, You're Doing Come From Away, right? Like, like all these musicals that resonate, and we'll talk to Rachel in a little bit in Hadestown, like it's so much about the group of people around us. And I think that's, we're trying to carry that banner really, as high and proud as we possibly can.
I want to ask you about another play of yours, Deity, where you specifically address representation and inclusion through the lens of wrestling. What brought you to write on this subject more directly as opposed to through the casting?
I was like unsure if the theater thing was going to work out for me when Deity came around, and I was taking on, the idea that I'm not entirely sure I still hold on to in the same way now, but the idea that, as a young, at that time, maybe 30 years old, Puerto Rican playwright, that folks just weren't going to sort of understand what I was doing in the theater. And, ironically, Deity is a play that sort of disproved that at the same time of trying to like live in that. A lot of folks got it, and not just folks who shared identity characteristics with me. But so I really wanted to get to this idea of feeling like, because I was person of color, a minority, all the different terms that, throughout the years we've gone through all these different terms,
right,
in terms of defining our identities. But because I found myself in a place where I, existed maybe outside of the characteristics of folks who I saw in the rooms where these decisions were made, I wanted to write about that. I worked in a few theater companies, and I saw sort of the inner workings of things. And, partially because I was young and thought that I knew better than everyone else, and partially because there was some validity, I think, to this. I felt like people were making bad business decisions based on preconceived notions of what audiences were going to connect to and things like that. So I wanted to get in there and grapple with it. I had at the time some experiences with artistic directors who said crazy things to me, about race and ethnicity and things, not racist things, but just weird, dumb things.
Yeah.
Maybe racist things, who knows? Like sometimes that line is messy.
Right.
So I wanted to deal with it. And I kind of felt like this was going to be my thing. I was going to sort of like attack it full on. If it worked, great. If it didn't work, like we'll figure something else out to do.
Do you feel like people then develop certain expectations of what you would be writing about from then on?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know if people did. I know that I ran from them. I know that like the plays that I wrote afterwards were consciously not specific about race and ethnicity a lot of times. I wanted to do shows where, actors, performers of all different races and genders could come in and do this work, and a theater company could take a play. Deity is a very specific thing. And, as we deal with, the casting of that show has to exist the way that it's defined.
Right.
Otherwise, it changes the entirety of the show.
Right.
Although, one of the things that we've talked about that I'm trying to get off the ground or hoping that someone in the ether will do is an all female or female identifying cast with the same ethnicities involved, but sort of, figuring out what kind of commentary does that make on masculinity. That's a sidebar to what we're talking about.
Fascinating, yeah. Yeah.
But I was more of the idea of like, okay, I did this very specific thing, and now I want to be able to write something that has a more broad space, and that, we've done the show 40 something times right now. We've probably had 25, 30 different young Latin men play Mace from that show. And every single one of them who's ever done it has like been nominated for awards and like, done all this. Almost every single actor who's played that has been nominated for some kind of, award. And I want to be able for them to go into the next show and not just be able to do the next Puerto Rican show. Like I want to be them to be able to do a bunch of other stuff. So I think I ran from it a little bit. And I don't know if that, helped hurt whatever, career-wise, but I think there is definitely an expectation when you write something like that's always going to be what you write.
Right.
And it's not necessarily for me.
When you talk about writing characters who could be played by actors of many different cultural backgrounds or experiences, do you find that you need to write that into the character descriptions? How would you navigate that as a playwright?
Yeah, it's tough. I think I haven't had enough success with multiple productions of those plays yet to sort of know how people react to it. Those first productions that you're in, when you're premiering something, it's less about like what you write and what kind of conversations you have with somebody. So, doing a show with Interact in Philadelphia, and Seth Rosen is the artistic director there, and he produced one of the early productions of Chad Deity, and he supported my next play, or one of my next plays called #The Revolution, which is an all-female cast. And, when we talked about it, and I was like, look, I'm not sure what the ethnicities of this are. I know that the ethnicities of these characters are. I know they're probably complicated and messy, and it's probably not all, women in the show. And I think that every combination makes changes to it. And I want us to figure out like who the best performers are, based on what the roles are, not necessarily, and then deal with the sort of fallout of what the story means to have this character played by an African-American woman, this character played by a white queer woman. Like you still grapple with that at a certain point, but you don't necessarily. I haven't had to write it in as much yet. I think when you get those plays that are really sort of licensed and widely going into those multiple productions, then it's really important to figure out what you're looking for.
I think that's so interesting, that case that you just talked about at Interact, because I wanted to ask if there had been a situation where you'd been surprised by mixing up the casting to be something that you hadn't originally imagined.
Yeah, we developed a show in Chicago that ultimately did not go very well in terms of reception. It's called The Upstairs Concierge, and the Goodman Theater had been really wonderful about supporting us, and we worked on it for 3 years. I say we because it was a real ensemble piece. I developed it with Teatro Vista, who's sort of one of my home companies back in Chicago. They helped bring Chad Deity to light. And we worked on it with a bunch of actors. The cast happened at that point to be largely Latin. I struggle with Latinx just because for a long time in my life, it was like Hispanic, and then it became Latino, and then I got really comfortable with Latino. And now, so as I stumble all of this, like I'm grappling with all of my, with all of it. There's a lot.
I think we
there's
all
many
are.
years.
I think we all are.
Yeah, there's many years that go into my definitions. I'm trying to be as precise as possible. But Teatro Vista, which has always been known as Chicago's sort of preeminent Latino theater, we worked on it together, and it's not a show that has anything to do with specific ethnicity. It was originally called Rebecca Oaxaca Lays Down a Bunt. It was about a baseball player. But it didn't really have anything to do with race, ethnicity. And then we did it in a couple of workshops. We went to final production. The final production ended up being super, super, super diverse, to the point one of the characters was written as a man. This actor named Theo Allen, who's a female actor, came in to audition for a different role, and we loved her, and we had somebody else playing the role that she auditioned for, and so we brought her in and we had her play this role who was a man, and just had her play it straightforward. In retrospect, we should have thought about even the specifics of that more, and what does it mean, and get the audience. The audience, I think, was kind of wondering what we were saying with that choice, and we weren't saying anything. We were trying to be silly all the way. Every choice we made in that show, we were trying to be silly, and we weren't trying to be silly by making the man a woman. We cast the best performer for that role. And Theo nailed it. Theo rocked it. So, some of the stuff that happens, look, it's going to be interesting to have a larger conversation about this too. But I have, at least in the point in my career where I am, fall on the side of advocating for specific performers. Like, I'm less interested in saying like, we need to get this ethnicity here because we don't have it, or we need to get this here because, we're missing it, than I am in taking those lacks into my mind as we have these conversations, and really, working for specific performers who are going to, be able to shine and be able to sort of like knock it out of the park. So,
I will say, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think it also speaks to how open you are to the difference in performers. So, you're open to envisioning different voices that look different ways, speak your words and tell your stories. And that's a deeper, more profound thing that I think is at the core. And what I think is really so important is to make sure our storytelling has a wider impact.
Yeah. I mean, that's good to hear. I mean, and it's true in certain cases, right? I mean, like, Chad Deity is a very particular thing. And you can't do, and we've had people ask, like, can we do this show? We want to do it at a college, but we don't have an Indian or Pakistani American performer to play VP. We have a Japanese American performer. Like, is that cool? And I'm like, no, that's not cool.
Right. Well, there are specific.
It's a different show.
Right. You have specific
it's a different show.
Instances where it is important that someone is specifically of a certain background. Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So it definitely, changes case by case. And, I did another show years ago called Welcome to Arroyos, and we did a few productions of it. And one of the lead characters is a young Puerto Rican woman. And I don't think in a production I've been involved with, I don't think she's ever been played by a Puerto Rican woman. She's been played a couple times. In the two productions that come to mind off the top of my head, we had her played by two different Iranian actresses of Iranian descent. I'm not sure if I would do that now. One of them happens to be one of my favorite actors and favorite people in the world, Tala Ash, who, if she listens to this, will get a kick out of me saying that she's one of my favorite people because I always give her such a hard time. But I'm not sure that I would do that again because I think the world has changed. I think my positioning on it maybe has changed, and there's a lot of great performers of Latin descent who would nail it. But at the time, she was the one, and also, the different productions that we've done, we've gone for exactly the right performer, the person who we thought was the best performer, and they've always nailed it. So I think it's tricky and it's complicated, and I do think it evolves. My thinking on it has evolved a bunch of times, and I'm sure it will evolve, a million times more.
Thank you so much, Kristoffer, for sharing your story with us. After the break, we'll be joined by Lynne Marie Rosenberg, Chisa Hutchinson, and Hadestown director Rachel Chavkin. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Today's conversation on casting stretches from the Windy City to the Big Apple. I'm in Chicago, and I'll let our New York City panelists introduce themselves.
Hi, this is Kristoffer Diaz. I am a playwright, sometimes television writer, and I teach at New York University.
I'm Chisa Hutchinson. I am a playwright/screenwriter, and I'm not particularly good at anything else, so no more slashes. That's it.
I'm Rachel Chavkin. I am primarily a director, occasional writer, and artistic director of a company called The Team, and live in New York.
I'm Lynne Marie Rosenberg. I'm an actor, writer, producer, and the host of a show on All Arts called Famous Cast Words that looks at casting problems to talk about representation and inclusion issues in the media.
Thank you so much. We are here to talk about diverse and inclusive casting. I often say to people, why are we still needing to discuss why it's so valuable to have diverse and inclusive casting? So let's start with that. Let's just start with Rachel. Thank you so much for what you have said and brought to light with your new Tony Award. And I would love to hear how you respond to that.
Recently engraved.
Yeah.
Why is it important? There's so many different levels to that, I guess. And I'm saying this, I didn't say this as part of my introduction, but as a white woman and raised on the East Coast. First and foremost, the people who are in the room are going to embed their DNA in some form on the work that is being produced. Obviously, that kind of starts with the writer in terms of the initial major thumbprint, but all voices hopefully are going to end up in the product that is on stage, whether that's a commercially developed musical or a downtown developed solo performance or anything in between. So if there is a lack of variety, it's boring. And I think it's very important that we talk about it. Certainly from a value standpoint, I think that's relevant, but I think it's also equally important to talk about it from an artistic integrity standpoint, and that the integrity of the work is profoundly diminished if there aren't a wide variety of voices. And so thinking about racial diversity, age diversity, geographic diversity, cultural diversity, economic diversity being some of them. If you don't have a wide pool pool of voices weighing in on the work that's being developed, then the work is just going to be more boring. And so fundamentally, if as artists our job is to make, work that is specific to us and then radically compelling to, as many different parts of us that you might find in the audience as possible, I think that diversity is important on that front.
Thank you. Thank you. Good night. I wasn't trying to really be that glib because obviously I feel that it's really important to talk about it. My question is always, it gets exhausting to have to keep explaining why we feel the way we do. But thank you for articulating that so beautifully. Chisa.
Yeah. Diversity in theater. I think seeing yourself in a piece of art, especially on stage because it's so representational, can be incredibly validating and reinforcing in ways that are lacking in other sort of aspects of life, really. So when someone who's part of a population that is otherwise overlooked, just ignored or dismissed, sees someone who looks like them on stage, it says to them like, hey, we see you, you exist, you belong, you belong here in the world. And I think that's incredibly important, again, for people who don't get that kind of messaging anywhere else. I think that there are entire populations of people in this country who, because they don't get that message a lot, don't really feel like they have anything to contribute, don't really feel like they should even give a shit about society because society doesn't give a shit about them. So I think it's our job as artists to make sure that they get the message that actually, no, you do matter, your life does matter, and theater is a nice shortcut for that. So yeah, let's get some underrepresented folks on the stage, please, and get them feeling like they can, that like they're free to give a shit about society. That'd be great.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that so many times when we aren't being represented, I've certainly heard this, that we're blamed for not existing, which is the other side of exactly what you just said, Chisa, about not feeling like we count or we matter enough to be seen or heard.
Yeah.
Lynne, do you have anything you'd like to add to this?
Yeah. I mean, I have like this incredibly lofty belief that the entertainment industry in general, and that includes theater, film, and television, has the single greatest chance to do the most good in the world and currently is doing some of the most harm. And I think it's through ubiquity. It's just that we're everywhere. We're the content that you're digesting constantly. Something that I saw on your website, Christine, is you were talking about realizing that there was an embedding of not seeing yourself represented, mm-hmm. that when you're creating your own content, then you start to not even think of yourself in a protagonist position if you're from an underrepresented community. And although I'm a white woman, I'm thicker than a lot of the skinny women who wind up in theater. And so I always saw myself as a supporting character. That's the way you come into the industry. Well, you're not going to play the protagonist. You're going to play second fiddle or the comedic sidearm. And so the more that you see that and the more that gets re-ingrained, the harder it gets to break out of that from a really sort of indoctrinated semiotics that we're getting used to seeing over and over again. So, and I think, Chris, something you said in your opener was that it's bad business. Like, we actually see this over and over again, that when you do represent well, when you do put the people whose story it's about in the roles, the money's better. Like forget the humanity of it, forget the morality of it, that you should be doing this just because this is the world. Like, if you look at Hidden Figures, if you look at Black Panther, if you look at Crazy Rich Asians, like, these things are making more money. And so the fact that we still keep having to fight for it suggests to me a much more deeper, insidious racism and bigotry than just like, oh, well, we're not going to make money that way. Right?
And the fact that you just mentioned 3 films.
Well, right.
And not plays.
Well, and I will say, right now, I think TV is doing much better than film and theater when it comes to representation. It's still majorly struggling, but I think it's for some reason, the digital platform seems to have broken open a storytelling module. So you can have shows like Glow, you can have shows like Special, you can have shows like High Maintenance, where people in a more fully, a broader pool can be viewed as human. And that you get to see yourself as human. It's like you're saying, Chisa, you exist. I validate that you exist in the world.
I just want to clarify one thing that you said about what you saw on my website, that when, as a writer, I do write Asian Americans as protagonists all the time. But maybe, but perhaps maybe what you were speaking about was when, as an actor, I often am cast as a supporting person, and that gets really deep into your psyche, sending you the messages that you get. And I just want to clarify.
Yes, thank you for clarifying.
Yes.
That's exactly what I meant. Yeah,
thank you. Chris, do you want to add to this this thread?
Yeah, I mean, having that part of the conversation of why are we having this conversation, since I got into the theater 20 years ago with the people who had been having the same conversation for 30 years. So I get it. And and every new generation that comes up, they're like, well, why didn't you guys solve this? And I'm like, we've been trying to solve it. In some ways, it's gotten a lot better than it was before. I mean, I will say, when I look at New Dramatist, where Chisa and I are well, I'm not anymore, I'm very sad about it, resident playwrights, or you look at the not-for-profit playwriting world, pretty nice. There's a good mix of faces, and the folks who are doing really exciting stuff is good and better than it was 20 years ago, and not as good as it needs to be. But there's a lot of sort of stuff happening. So I may be a little less pessimistic in some ways. But to answer the question, I'm a Puerto Rican kid who doesn't speak Spanish. I grew up. My best friends their last names were Weissman, Weisberg, and Budman. We watched Eddie Murphy movies and listened to hip hop together. My kids are half Filipino. My best friends in college is Israeli immigrant, basically. This is the world that I know. I could keep going. This is the world that I know. My story is not gonna be my abuelita on the couch, making me café con leche. I didn't have that experience. My grandmother watched the Yankee game and cursed at us. That's what she did. And she was wonderful. But it wasn't any of that. It wasn't any of the traditional stuff. And if that's not and then my life is just a bunch of different people. So that's what I want to see. And I think we should be able, if that's what a person creates, that's what a person should create. But I think about Reggie Watts. If you ask Reggie Watts to sit down and write his diverse show, he would laugh at you probably, first of all. But he does magic by just being everything and make the thing that you need to make.
It sounds like you're saying the word diverse gets used as a catch-all or a code. Say a little more about that.
To me, it's so tricky. We get into that idea. There's the idea sometimes that when people say we need to diversify something, it's we're going to bring in one group of ethnicities. We're going to make Black Panther. And it's well, that's not necessarily you're helping to diversify the Avengers to some extent, but what becomes diverse is this group of folks and this multiplicity. And that, to me, because of my life experience, is I believe in the multiplicity, and I'm looking for that. I think that's what everybody's saying to some extent. And it is and this conversation does become about race and ethnicity, but it's about so many different things. And we talked about in the Hercules conversation, about age, and you talk, then we can go deep down that road. But to me, I think it goes back to what Rachel was saying right at the beginning. And it's it's just more interesting, and it's just more the world that I experience. I mean, I think it was George Wolfe who, used to say he wanted the public theater's audience to look like a New York City subway stop. And I'm just yeah, of course. Yeah. That's what I want the world to look like. Yeah. Not everybody does, but that's what I want the world to look like.
But I think also your room, when you're making theater, your room has to look like a New York City subway stop. And I think that's something that you've been so great at, especially with the team and also with Hadestown and with Natasha Pierre, is that you just have to decide that your room is going to look like that. You just have to decide in your casting practice, this is what we're going to have. You have to make the decision. It has to be really intentional, I think.
I think so, and it's being intentional about what excellence means.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you keep going? Because that's awesome. Yeah. I want to talk about this.
Well, it's just again, I'm passionate about talking about it from a place of excellence because too often it can get pinned as values versus racial diversity or, again, whatever type of diversity we're talking about. And it's just a really false and deeply harmful binary. And so when you begin to say, okay, so excellence is going to be the vibrancy of streams of life. I think that's like some philosopher. All these different modes of being in the space together, which for Comet was a huge thing that we talked about, and that had to reflect Tolstoy, because Tolstoy was this writer who was writing about every aspect of Russian life. Now, yes, all the characters in his novel probably looked across like a spectrum. If you drove from west to east across Russia or vice versa, you see really, really different looking people. But the classes, so economic diversity and age diversity, and just vibe diversity, all of that you want in the room, and so that becomes part of the definition of excellence.
I like this idea of thinking of diversity not as a value, because that's not a value that everyone shares, but thinking of it more in terms of an asset or a benefit, or you know what I mean, so that it's more a more sort of concrete bottom line thing.
Well, I think it really
so that folks who are not all into the whole warm and fuzzy, let's all love each other and inclusion and la la la, right? Like the people who are not into that can have something to grab onto and say, oh no, actually, oh no, it does work. It works, and it's better, right? If there is some way, some language that we can use to get folks who don't buy into diversity as a value, if there is some magic word, some
beyond not boring,
some password, some
beyond not boring,
that we can say to get them on board. What is it?
I know. I think that, we started talking about this earlier, Chris and I, about how the language is fluid in so many ways. And I have been really advocating for moving away from the term non-traditional casting, which I understand historically has been so important, but because it indicates not normal. And, so that's why I have been trying to say diverse and inclusive casting, which of course is not perfect either. But
if I can, part of it is the one size fits all in this. Right,
yes.
There's a non-traditional casting thing that actually has meaning. If you're doing Arthur Miller with an African-American cast, that's non-traditional. It's traditionally played by people who look a certain way. You're coming in with a take. You're coming in with a thing. If you're creating a new music, if you're doing Hadestown, and you're casting Ava Noblezada, that's not non-traditional. You're casting a killer. You're casting the best performer on Broadway to murder the audience in the best possible way. That's not non-traditional. That is actually the most traditional thing you can do.
Yeah.
Is not hold back. We're not going to cast Ethel Merman because she's X, Y, or Z. We're going to cast the best person to do this thing. So language gets so sloppy.
Yeah.
And it really
even
binds
the word
us.
diverse, right? Now has become this shorthand for do you have
for black,
right? Exactly. Do you have black?
Do you have a black person?
Right.
Right.
Do you have and then do you have 4 black people who all went to Yale, who all have the same training, who are that could be really great too, but what are we talking about when we talk about diversity? Are we talking about I'm going to stop talking. I talked for 40 minutes. You guys.
No, it's great. I want to ask all of you to share your insight or specific experiences with this. Have you ever gotten pushback on your casting vision? How have you navigated that?
I think any producer or director who offers me an opportunity to present my work knows what I'm about. They know that I'm going to be real specific about who I want cast in roles as far as race or gender, or so I haven't really run up against much resistance on that front. Where I do encounter frustration is when I've got a play, as all my plays are, that requires a specific race of character. Somebody's Daughter is a play that requires 3 Asian American women, 1 Asian American man, 1 black man, and there's only 1 role for a white guy. And it got read to death everywhere. People were really responding to the story, but they could only do readings. And those readings would be I had one event producer emailed me the day before the reading to say, oh, so listen, about casting, we were able to find 2 Asian American women. Would it be okay if we just had it's just a reading, so we could just have like a white woman read the last role? And I'm just like, ah. So at this point, this is like, I don't know, the 5th reading of this play, and I'm thinking like, no one is ever going to produce this play. Like, it's never going to, they can't even cast it properly for a reading. Like, it's going to get done nowhere. And I think,
but they're just not doing their work.
I know.
I mean, that's what drives me crazy.
And then, okay, so my plan was like, okay, you know what? I bet if I had somebody really badass, like Lucy Liu, attached to this play, like it would get done in a heartbeat, right? So whatever, I'm at my day job, I'm bored, I'm angry. I Google Lucy Liu agent and like up pops Lucy Liu's agent's information. And I'm like, okay, cool. And I'm like typing a little email to Lucy Liu's agent being like, hey there, Lucy Liu's agent. I've got this play with a role in it that I think could be really great for your client. Would you like to give it a read? You never send the script, of course. Like, so, and I'm thinking like, okay, yeah, maybe I'll in a week or a month or whatever, I'll get a polite thanks, but no thanks. But at least I tried, right? At least I like tried to put in some work. Like 10 minutes later, I get an email back from Lucy Liu's agent, and she's like, yeah, sure, I'd love to give it a read. And she read it by the end of the day. And she said, you know, Lucy would probably love to do a play, you know, between shootings for elementary or whatever. And I'm like, okay. And she's like, is anyone interested in this? You know, has anyone, who's doing it? And I'm like, well, not yet, but let me just use this email as leverage, you know, to like get someone in. And I did.
I'm in early stages conversation
with
a bunch of different producers.
With a bunch of different places. So as far as like doing the work, right? I literally, 5 minutes Googling, right? I Googled for 5 minutes. I got the information that I needed. I got 2 readings with Lucy Liu out of it, which was crazy. And we were like so close to signing her for at Second Stage for Somebody's Daughter. We were so close. And then she got offered a directing gig with Netflix. Okay, cool, whatever. But I still got the production, right? And it's just, it literally a couple minutes Googling. Like, it's really, it's not that hard.
But also, I mean, what kills me is like, I could give you 40 actors. I've seen that play. I know that play. I could give you 40 actors right now that you could call in. I mean, that's what just drives me bananas.
Yes. Yeah, okay.
Do the work.
Yeah, do the work.
And it's interesting. So I get pushback sometimes. So people come to me for casting lists sometimes because of the, I had this Tumblr that I kept of offensive casting notices, and that became a Joe's Pub show that I did. And because of that work I've done, people have come to me asking for casting lists, which is great. That's my favorite thing to do. Like, second to performing, my joy is connecting people to work. Like, that's it. And for the first time, I had a TV show ask me for a casting list. And the list I gave them maybe had like 2 white guys on it. You know, it was for improv, so it could be anybody. It was an improv comedy show. And everyone I gave them was a POC, trans, or disability. I mean, it was like they just came off my list and it was like, these are the people I'm going to give you. And that I got pushback on. They were like, so we saw your list. They're like amazing people, but, and you know, they called some people in, but it was interesting to see most of the people they called in were the like straight white guys that were on my list. Yeah. You know, it's like even when you have one person doing the work, everyone in the kitchen has got to be making the same soup.
I can't tell you how many people call me for recommendations of Asian American actors, but they'll say something like, "Do you know any Asian American actresses?" Could you give me a few more characteristics that you're looking for? So they're fundamentally that kind of perspective on Asian person. I don't know anything more about what they need to be. That's a problem.
Yeah.
Like, not even an age range?
No, I know. I know. Just give me some quality, something that indicaes, it's a human being with different facets. That'd be awesome.
Right.
Well, and
Yeah.
this is like not a pushback in any way, but that's been from the directorial seat. A lot of the interesting conversations that have come up have been working with white writers who have been very values driven, absolutely wanting to have a racially diverse cast. In particular, has been how that has played out, and then just talking with them about how to make sure that the character is, because as much as there's not, I mean, I'm glad, and I'm not surprised that none of us have used the phrase colorblind casting, much less the non-traditional phrase.
Right.
But
No one in this room about to use colorblind.
right, exactly. And I think that, thinking about that from a new play perspective and from the writing perspective is just a big one that has come up for me working with white writers who are interested in not only hiring artists of color to play the work, but to make sure that the character feels accustomed to that. And do you then look to the performer to help you with that specificity? Then there hasn't been any sort of single answer to how I've seen white writers try to meet that challenge. But I can say that is actually the primary ongoing, again, not pushback, but just a thing that comes up in thinking about racially diverse casts.
Right. We've had, in other episodes of this podcast, we've had some amazing conversations about writing outside your lived experience and also cultural appropriation versus appreciation, where these very things come up about helping people to kind of wrap their heads around how other people have navigated those kinds of situations and come up with some really rich stories and casting. So listeners, you'll have to dig through all of the episodes for that. Let's talk a little bit more about surprises that any of you have encountered when you maybe have approached a project with a certain cast in mind and somebody's come in and changed your mind, and how that's gone. Anybody have any specific situations they want to share?
Yeah. So we were doing Rent Live back in January of this year, and those characters are so iconic, particularly Mark Cohen, and we had Jordan Fisher, who's African American, a mixed race, I'm not entirely even sure, but who basically announced, my lifelong dream is to play this part, and he was fantastic, and he was the best possible choice for it, and it raises levels of complexity and sort of layers to who that character is, simply by presenting who he was. We made no changes to the script based on it. We made no changes to other casting based on it. Just him showing up on stage, I thought, it did some really compelling stuff for us. And that actually updated the script in some way without us, updated the event without us having to do any specific work to the text.
Thank you. Rachel, I know we only have you for about 10 more minutes, so I wanted to follow up on something you started talking about earlier about how your room needs to really reflect all different kinds of experiences. And I wondered if you wanted to speak more about that and how you assemble your team and how that ends up influencing the way you populate the world of the play you're directing.
Yeah, I think the room, first of all, there's many rooms, right? The room refers to multiple rooms. The room is the design process, which is actually, as a director, where I spend probably aggregate about 75% of my time. I was at Mimi Lien's this morning for pre-production work on a show, and that's actually just a huge part of the brain. And actually I think it's the area of the theater field that is the most behind is particularly the racial diversity of the creative teams that are thinking about the show beyond just director, because I think in some ways, at least casting has, as you said, Chris, I think there's reason to be optimistic in terms of people understanding that a racially diverse cast is a good thing. So fundamentally, the room is sort of whatever group of brains are meeting the play, and I definitely, or a musical, and I definitely think that wants to in part be content-led. So if I'm working on a piece that particularly, for example, speaks to aspects of Southern life, I definitely want to make sure, because I'm from Tidewater, Maryland, and Washington, D.C., which D.C. is definitively a southern city, but it's also kind of a weird own place because of the, being the seat of national government, blah, blah, blah. So if there's a trailer that is a center point, for example, of some of the storytelling, I'm going to be thinking about both where that trailer is set and wanting to make sure if there's not Floridians necessarily specifically on the team, that there are people who know what the inside of that trailer should feel like and smell like, and what you hear if you're sitting in the trailer at 4 p.m. I need to know that. And then similarly, that's going to bring up economic diversity, and that being something that I think about with my dramaturg, or the associate director, or the assistant director, or who the choreographer is, if there is a choreographer, and as well, of course, as the people on stage who are carrying the life forward and embodying it. Because, I think the goal is honesty. And that doesn't mean replication or realism exactly, but it means that there has to be some knowledge, some recognition on the artist's part of the type of life that they are manifesting. And it's why it's incumbent upon artists to be as broad and consumptive as possible of the world, because we have to keep broadening ourselves to know more so that we can carry more stories forward. But yeah, that's what I would say in terms of how I think about building a room. It's what does that piece require?
Well, and I wonder for your devised processes as well, how that is different than a scripted process in terms of who you collect together.
Well, with the devised process, I always liken it to building a bus while you're driving it downhill.
Nice.
It's
rad.
So messy. So you sort of have to know-ish what part of the hill you're pointing towards. But for the devising process, it's, I would say, 1,000 times more important because, at least with a team, every single person is sharing equal responsibility as a writer. So there's no distinction between who necessarily is representing or playing that story and whose story it is. So for Reconstruction, we've had, which is the piece that the team is working on right now, we've had endless, and these conversations are actually not separate. They are truly the process of this show will become the product for it. But conversations about how do we decenter whiteness in the room? Can we decenter whiteness if the director is white? How should we actually approach decision-making differently? Because the aim of the show, I think, in part, is to reconstruct our brains in the room as a microcosm of America's brain for a post-white supremacist world. So if we're going to do that from a company that has historically been white, either entirely or majority, that is a big reformation process. And so actually all of those conversations are becoming very intricately tied to the content that we are making. And as a result, we have not been able to have those conversations in any ethical, much less effective way if whiteness is the dominant voice in that conversation. So it's been a very circular conversation for that. But it's with the devising work, it's, just even more so.
Thank you so much. I know, Rachel, you have to go, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for adding your incredible insight into this conversation.
Thank you all.
Bye.
All right, bye.
We're grateful to Rachel Chavkin for joining us. Now we're going to carry on. Okay, so I have a specific question for Chisa that I already asked Chris. So if you forgive me, I'm just going to start with that, and then I'll include Lynne and Chris in another question, okay? Chisa, I wanted to ask you if you find it necessary or useful when you're writing the character markers in your script to specify what cultural background they have or presence or absence of disability, et cetera, because there are different approaches to this, and I wonder what yours is.
Oh, I do. Absolutely. Every time. Every single time. Even if it doesn't necessarily come into play the way that people expect it's going to, I write it in because that's how I see it. And that is what is informing my creation of the character, right? Is how I envision them. So this, there was a two-hander that I wrote called Dead and Breathing. And I specify 2 Black women. One of them is older and wealthy and sick, right? And the other is young but younger and trans. And I had a critic mention in a review, I don't understand why the playwright wasn't, I've read the script, and in the character description she specifies that these characters need to be this color and this gender and this. And I didn't feel like it was really necessary. I feel like the nurse could have been my wife, who's white. And I'm on the one hand, I'm thinking like, okay, cool. So I've done my job if I've gotten you to see how this Black trans woman is just as fucking human. I got you to recognize that this Black trans woman is just a human, right? And living her life, and that you should see the similarities, between her and, say, your wife, who is also a nurse. That's great, right? But on the other hand, I'm thinking like, oh, dude, like, if you don't think that her being Black and trans has led her to be the compassionate enough to take on hospice care, for example, right? If you don't think that has informed the path that she has walked, right? If you don't think that it matters in a way that doesn't necessarily require her to be dwelling on the fact that she is Black and trans and talking about that all the damn time, then you've missed half the point. And that's very frustrating. But yeah, I guess the short answer to your question is, yeah, I do specify at the very, very top of every play what color, what gender, and I throw in some other human characteristics in there also, like what age, and also, are they sarcastic? Do they have a sense of humor? Are they, right. Because I need people to acknowledge that, oh, hey, yeah, Black people are people. they're just humans living their lives, whether or not they spend the next 90 minutes talking about race.
Right.
That has nothing to do with it, right? They are who they are. Deal with it.
And it's how you envision the story being told, not the way someone else who might want to cast it in a different way envisions it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Well, and I know, Lynne, you've had a lot of experience seeing casting notices that are
I sure have.
Unusual. You want to talk about that a little bit as it pertains to what we're talking about?
I will, although I do want to say one thing on this question too, which is, so I'm not a produced playwright necessarily, but I do have 2 full-length plays, and I feel as a cisgender, able-bodied, straight, white woman that my responsibility when I write anything is to either write something that anyone can play and then put in my script requirements, non-all whiteness and non-all cisness, to really insist in the writing of the script that this should encompass your room should be well fleshed out. And then in the work I've done with my Joe's Pub show, and then now the interview show I'm doing, is that my job is to use the privilege I have been given and use the platforms I have been given, whether it's All Arts or whether it's Joe's Pub, to let other people stand on the podium and talk. So that I'm creating structures that gives other people a chance to speak when they're sometimes not given a chance to speak. But when you write things like that in a script and then you get to the casting process, what I have learned is that you have to state like 5 or 6 times in a breakdown that no, we're really looking for all ethnicities. We're really looking for all body types. We're really looking for all abilities, because otherwise you will get sent the same 20 white ladies or whatever it is. And I have had friends of mine, actors of color, say like, and I've even talked to, unfortunately, some representation that says, yeah, no, when it says all ethnicities, we still generally send our white actors. So you have to specify over and over and over again in a breakdown, no, for real. No, seriously, this is real. But my God, I mean, the breakdowns I've seen are just, the couple that sort of started it all when I started collecting breakdowns years ago. One was, I have these memorized after so many years. Asian woman, 20s, 30s, doesn't have the hard features of most other Asian women. She is more elegant and sophisticated and knows it.
Oh, dear.
And then another one, the other one that started it all was Leroy, a young LeVar Burton at heart, aware he's the token black friend, but totally cool with it.
Okay.
And those were real. Those were for real. They came out of for real casting services. And those were, when I saw those, I mean, I had been collecting, shitty breakdowns that I saw as a white woman and shitty breakdowns I had seen that friends had sent me. But it was those two that kind of made me go like, I got to do something about this. Like, I can't keep reading this crap and wake up in the morning.
See, I'm cool with that play. I want to see that play.
The Leroy play?
Yeah, like if it's about that. Like,
Well,
do that. Like, that shit's real. That's real.
I would
but
agree
it's
with that
not that's not, it doesn't sound like that's what they were doing.
Yeah, no, I think what it was like, some sort of crap TV show where you got a bunch of white people and then one black guy. If that story is written by Chisa and we're investigating what that means, investigating what that tokenism means, I'm interested in that, but that's not what we're dealing with.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Let's see. Well, I want to give you a chance to, each one of you, if there's something that we haven't talked about pertaining to casting that you want to bring up, let's give you a chance to do that. Otherwise, I have a follow-up question, but I'd rather hear from you first.
I don't know. I guess I would just say stick to your guns.
Yeah.
Again, people who know my work, they know that I'm gonna have some specific demands about what, and I'm gonna say no. And I have said no. I've said no to productions because people wanted to miscast my plays.
How have they approached you about that with that information?
Either through my agent or through the publisher. This one really, really super egregious example was through the publisher. They just sent me an email, and they did it just to say that they did it, but they knew what the answer was going to be. That play that I just mentioned with the two black women and one of them is trans, they wanted to know if they could cast two men and two men. And they suggested in their email to the publisher, well, you could provide us with the names, with male names, or, we could provide them ourselves, like George and Peter. And I was like, oh, that's... And I just wrote back, absolutely not. Thank you, bye. Yeah. If it's important to you, it should be important enough to turn down an opportunity to have your play presented, because at that point, it's not your play that they're presenting. Right. So I say stick to your guns. If you're flexible, that's cool. But if not, if you really are seeing a character in a particular way and they want to cast it differently, then it's not for you.
Mm-hmm. I think saying no is such an important reiteration over and over again, that because we're in this industry, I think we're often told we feel disempowered, whether we're actors or writers, whoever we are, there's a paucity and you've got to grab onto anything that comes up. And I think that's a load of goods that were sold. And I think, yes, it would be amazing to be Frances McDormand accepting her Oscar and talking about inclusivity writer, which is also the name of that's my porn name, inclusivity writer. Inclusion writer, that's what it is. Yes, that is an amazing use of platform, but anywhere you are, you have the opportunity to say no and say why you said no. That no matter where you are in the industry, you're a 20-year-old who just came out of your certificate program, like you still have the opportunity to say no to something and to stand up for what's right in a more general sense.
And also to say yes to all the good things, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And to say yes and to amplify whatever you see that is really going well.
Okay, great. Thank you so much to our panel for your insights on inclusive casting. Thanks for joining us. As always, to be continued. This has been the Dramatist Presents Talkback, a production of the Dramatists Guild of America and Boom Integrated. Our podcast is lovingly produced by Sarah Storm, Christine Toy Johnson, and Amy Von Masick. It's edited by Jen Grossman and Clint Rhodes of John Marshall Media. Special thanks to Tina Fallon, Ralph Sevish, David Foe, Terry Stratton, Adrian Glover, and John Marshall Cheery. TalkBack is distributed by the Broadway Podcast Network. Like and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. For episode transcripts and exclusive content, visit us on the web at DramatistGuild.com. Keep the conversation going on Twitter using #DGTalkback. I'm Christine Toy Johnson. We'll see you next time.